Good morning and welcome back to another episode of Food Systems in Season with the Central District with UF-IFAS Extension. And today we are in our second session, and today's topic is going to be hydroponics and aquaponics. And on the next slide, we've got a list of our sessions. If you did miss session 1 on January 7th, be sure to check it out on our YouTube channel. January 14th, which is today, we have the honor of two wonderful presenters today, Dr. Bill Lester and Maxine Hunter. And we do have 3 additional sessions, so stay tuned. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Bill Lester.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Like Wendy said, we're going to be talking a little bit about hydroponics and aquaponics today, because I know both Maxine and I get a lot of questions about that. People are very, very interested, and they love the idea of being able to grow their own food hydroponically, and then also fish. I mean, you can't beat that. And you can do it. It's very doable, but you have to be very, very careful how you do it. Because if you don't do it correctly, sometimes what you end up with is a lot of dead plants and a lot of dead fish, and we don't want to see that happen. So in the world of hydroponics, basically what hydroponics is, it's just growing plants, primarily fruits and vegetables, in water, technically. Now, you don't have to grow it in just water. What a lot of people will do is they grow it in a sterile media, which means you're not growing your vegetables in the ground, in the garden, in a raised bed out in your backyard. You're growing it in some kind of sterile media. That can be a lot of different things. That could be sterilized sand. That could be gravel. As a matter of fact, there are systems where they have these little round rocks, little round pieces of gravel that you grow the plants in, because what that does is it gives the plant roots something to grab a hold of so the plant can stand up straight, which is always a very good thing when you're growing lettuce or tomatoes or something. So there's a lot of different hydroponic systems out there. Obviously, many of you have probably seen the grocery stores before. You can buy greenhouse grown cucumbers and tomatoes and a lot of different really great produce. And there are huge greenhouse operations, very expensive. They use a lot of equipment and pumps and moving water and electric. But something that we found that works really, really well for homeowners is something called a simple passive system. So passive is you put it together and you don't need a pump, you don't need moving water, you don't need an air pump, you don't need electricity. You can just put it together and you're going to be able to grow your own fresh vegetables at home. So probably to help explain what I'm talking about, I have a system right here. Let me go ahead and do that we've had several classes on, and one of our master gardeners, Jason Murray, introduced me to this idea of a small system that you can build at home and just set on top of a table. You could put this on a screen porch. In the right time of year, you can put it out in the middle of your backyard on a table. A lot of people have little homeowner or hobbyist greenhouses. It's perfect for that. But it's a small hydroponic system in a plastic tub right here. And we don't want to recommend one manufacturer over another, but these are in hefty 4.5 gallon containers. So you see this is just a plastic storage container. It has the really good clip-on sides. So when you put the lid on, you can clip it and the lid's not going to fall off. What you do is you purchase one of these, and then you have to drill the appropriate size holes on the top to put little net pots in. Now, if you're interested in getting into hydroponics, if you look online, there's a huge number of companies online that sell a wide variety of hydroponic supplies. So little things like net pots, you can purchase online. Very important, you get the type that has the little lip around the edge, because then after you drill the hole in the top, you can take the pot and put it in there, and it's going to hold and not fall inside. So what you're going to grow your plants in, and this system works really, really well for lettuce. Jason prefers to grow red leaf lettuce, red sales lettuce. He said that variety always grows really well for him. Another variety is black seeded Simpson. That's a green leaf lettuce. So that's going to do really well. If you don't want to grow lettuce, you can grow herbs in this system. You can try growing spinach, Swiss chard. There's a lot of different healthy greens you can grow this way. But what you're going to do is you're also going to purchase Rockwool Cubes. Now, this setup right here, we've used in a number of classes. So my little cube isn't much of a cube anymore. It's looking a little bit bent. But what Rockwool is it's a substance that's used a lot in hydroponics, and it's spun rock. So they take a certain kind of rock and heat it up to a very high heat, and they spin it just like cotton candy. And they could shape it into little cubes, blocks, very commonly used in commercial hydroponic systems, but you could purchase this online and use it yourself. So you take this little cube, you put it in a little net pot, and they come with a little hole pre-drilled on the top. Put a couple lettuce seeds in, and you're almost good to go. We do have, like I said, a whole training video on this, and I'll go ahead and put the link in here. And then afterwards, I'll put the link in the video description so that you can go ahead and watch it and get all the exact details. But you're going to mix up a hydroponic nutrient mix. I think it's 1 gallon's worth. And the nice thing is 1 gallon is going to perfectly fill this container so that when you put your net pots and the Rockwool cubes in, it's going to be just touching the water, and your seeds are going to get nice even water, and your lettuce is going to sprout. And as the lettuce grows, it's going to take up the water. Your lettuce roots are going to start to go deeper and deeper into the container, and the water level is going to go down. And ideally, you won't have to add any more water. Now, you probably want to double check on that, because if you're growing your plants, let's say outside on your back porch or in a greenhouse, and it's warm and very low humidity, you may be going through a lot of water, and the water level is going to drop below. So you're going to have to add a little bit more water. Like I said, Jason explains this much better than I do on the video. And in just a moment, I'll go ahead and pull up that link and put it in the chat for you so that you'll be able to watch that and go ahead and start with your own little simple passive homemade system. We have another extension agent, Hannah Wooten, who is with Orange County Extension, who has a really great video online also. I'll put that link in the chat too. And what she does essentially the same thing, but in a 5-gallon bucket. Very simple. You don't need pumps and equipment or electric, and you can grow lettuce really, really well all year round. That's one of the nice things, because if you're trying to grow lettuce out in your backyard in the garden during the summer, it's not going to do very well. It's way too hot, way too humid, way too rainy. So what you want to do is grow it hydroponically, and if you grow it indoors, you can actually grow a steady supply of lettuce for you and your family year round. So like I said, I'll put links to both of those videos so that you can get a better idea of exactly what I'm talking about. That was just kind of a little overview of some passive systems that you can put together at home. So I know that for anybody who has questions about raising fish with your system, I'm not the person to ask. I like fish, I love seafood, but I don't know how to raise fish. But fortunately, we have Maxine here who knows all about raising fish in the systems, and she can share with you the basics that you need to keep in mind before you start spending a lot of time and energy and money and putting together a system. So, Maxine, how do you add fish to something like this?
Let's talk about that, Bill. So it isn't terribly difficult, but there are a few intricate details that we definitely want to consider. And just before I jump onto that, I want to say thank you for sharing that tub idea, because a few of my master gardeners have followed your video and have used those hydroponic tubs, and they have been very successful, and they are still using them now, almost 2 years into this project. So
they work really well. And once you get it up and going, if you get your timing down, you can have a steady year-round supply of fresh grown lettuce. Whereas if you're doing it in your backyard, you can't do that.
That's right. That's right. So like I said, I have several people here that have been very successful with that system and are still enjoying using their tubs that we built. So awesome. All right, we will move on into aquaponics now, if that's good with you. Now, how do I get my screen back up? There we go. Awesome. Thanks, Bill. All right. So as Bill and Wendy said, my name is Maxine Hunter. I am in UF-IFAS Extension, Marion County, which is in Ocala, Florida. I grew up in the UF Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences Department with my mother, who's a fish veterinarian. So I have a lot of experience growing fish and raising them, and now I teach horticulture, so it's been a really great mix. So some of the material in this is from my mom, who is Dr. Ruth Francis Floyd, and again, she is here at the University of Florida as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about water quality, the fish species that you can use in aquaponics, as well as the plant species. So, and then lastly, we'll wrap it up with just a few items on food safety considerations, just to make sure you have these thoughts going through your mind as you build your system, because it's much easier to adapt a system in the building process rather than having to backtrack and then add extra things later. All right, so make sure this changes here. There we go. All right, so I'm figuring the system out. Sorry, I'm new to StreamYard. All right, so a little bit on aquaponics. So Bill talked quickly about some passive systems with hydroponics. Aquaponics is the combination of horticulture and aquaculture practices and a food production system. This is the basic system of raising aquatic animals, and these could be freshwater or saltwater, and using hydroponic plants which are grown in a soilless environment. So it's just combining the two systems. These usually use recirculating systems that use natural bacterial cycles, specifically the nitrogen cycle, to convert fish waste into plant nutrients. So, and it's a very delicate balance. So it's not impossible. It's not necessarily difficult. Some places have been using this for hundreds of years. So the Aztec Indians, and even some of the Egyptians used aquaponics. So there's a lot of different notes and things that go back for many centuries on how to do these. So some of the very simplistic ones were using floating beds on lake systems many years ago with tribal groups. And so those were pretty unique. So now we have a lot more technology. We have a lot smaller systems and a lot of availability to be creative and to build our own systems. So the size and complexity of the system really depends on your imagination and what you want to use. So a lot of people use recycled or upcycled materials, including IBC totes or food grade drums, barrels, things like that. So we'll take a look at a few of these. If I can get my slides to go. There we go. So let's talk just a few minutes about the aquatic species that are normally used in aquaponics. This is by no means an all-inclusive list, but some of the popular ones are goldfish or koi. Koi can be really fun because they actually have very special colors. They get beautiful. They're large, they're showy. So if you're looking something where you don't want to harvest the fish, koi are a fantastic option. They actually have koi shows throughout the world. These fish can go in upwards of $25,000 to $100,000 for a single fish at some of these shows. They are absolutely spectacular. Obviously, they're much less expensive koi as well, you know, just a few bucks per fish. So that's one option. Again, that is more for visual cues, and it still will provide the nitrate sources that the plants need, but they're not going to be really an edible source. For edible sources, some of the most popular, obviously, tilapia is the #1 food species for aquaponic systems. Brim or crappie can also be used. Bass and perch can be used, but they're more sensitive. And catfish is something that is not something that I generally recommend if it's going to be a crowded system. Catfish are an excellent food source, and they will absolutely work in these systems. But the one big key with using catfish and aquaponics is your stocking densities, because they have the barbels. And so you don't want them to be so close to each other that they're wounding each other with those barbels, because then you start getting potential bacterial risks in your system. Shrimp, crawfish, and lobsters, as well as prawns, have been used, as well as ornamentals such as cichlids. So that's just the quick and dirty list of some very common aquatic species that would be appropriate for aquaponics. Let's talk a little bit more about our most popular ones, though. So tilapia are very, very popular food grade fish here in Florida. They do quite well in our environment. They've actually gotten introduced into a few of our waterways, and so that's not good. But they're globally one of the most cultured fish in North America. They're native to Africa, they're and the Middle East. One of the main species we see here in Florida is the blue tilapia, but there are 3 distinct species, the Nile tilapia, and then the Mozambique, I'm probably not saying that right, tilapia. So my apologies for the mispronunciation. So blue tilapia is exotic to Florida, and you do have to have a permit to have them, depending on what county you're in. So that's really important to notate. I will say, though, the permit is not hard to obtain. It's simply filling out the form. So if you have questions on that, feel free to reach out to me later, or you can go to myfwc.com, and that is where you would apply for the permit. So the permits are not hard to achieve, and they're not costly. You just have to have one. So they really don't want these fish released into our natural waterways, obviously. So it's important to make sure that your system is sustainable, and that you're not going to have overflow that would reach a water body. So the biggbiggest concern with raising tilapia here in Florida, depending on where you're located at, is they are cold sensitive. And so if your water temperature is going to decrease below 55 degrees, you need to have a heater. So water bodies do cool slower than our air temperatures. So it's not necessarily a large heater that you have to keep that water temperature above 55, but you do need to go into this being aware that they're cold sensitive. Generally speaking, tilapia are very hardy. They are they tolerate being handled, as well as suboptimal water quality, which goes along with aquaponics. They also are very tolerant of crowding. They grow very rapidly. So all of these are big positives for using them in aquaponic systems. So a couple challenges just to note with tilapia breeding and culture. First of all, they are prolific mouth brooders, which can result in stunting. So the female will hold the eggs in her mouth, and then it takes about 2 weeks, but she will not feed during this time. So they spawn and reproduce very quickly. And again, your females may be lighter and not growing the way you want them to if they're reproducing actively in the system. So there are some management options for broodstock, and that means you can leave them in the pond. You can separate them into cages. There are ways to separate males and females. And then you can take the fry away from the females. So you'll see the females when they have the fry in there, which are always very neat to look at. So I always enjoy seeing the mama fish with the little brood in her mouth, and they swim out. But one of the things you'll notice is she may have some really puffy cheeks, kind of like a hamster. And then the little babies will swim out. So you can take those away from her. That's absolutely appropriate. All right, so just quickly on the type of plants that you could think about using in aquaponics. So there are some ornamentals that you can use. However, we're going to focus on the vegetables. So vegetables would include lettuce, herbs, tomatoes, peppers, certain squash, arugula, beans. Generally, your main ones are going to be your lettuce, your herbs, tomatoes, and peppers. Anytime you have tomatoes or squash or cucumbers, something that would be more of a vining variety in aquaponics, remember you're going to have a way to support the upper stem. So oftentimes in these systems, we use smaller bushing varieties and things that don't need a lot of support. So again, lettuce is a fantastic variety, but you're certainly not limited to lettuce. You could also do things like kale, Swiss chard. You could try some of those. And of course, one of my favorite things to do is to play with different varieties and different species in these types of systems and just trial and error. So don't be afraid to try something new. But when we say try something new, some things that we don't want to do would include blueberries or acidic loving plants, because your pH for the fish is going to need to be higher. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And root crops. You definitely don't want to have any kind of a root crop in an aquaponic system where the fish water would be touching the edible part of the plant. And we'll talk about food safety later. So no carrots, no beets, no potatoes, no onions. Perennial plants such as strawberries and blackberries also won't do well. And no blueberries or other acid-loving plants. Those are not a good fit. All right, so this is just a quick graphic of kind of how the aquaponic systems work, looking at the nitrogen cycle. So you can see most of the time your plants are in the top, and they could be equal depending on the pump and style of system that you build. Again, you know, the sky's the limit as far as where your imagination can take you as far as building and designing. There's a lot of people out there that have far more expertise in building these systems than I do as far as their creativity level and knowledge level. So you can do these systems where they're gravity fed. They don't necessarily have to have a pump, but they're often considered using a bell siphon or other type of hydroponic pump that pumps the water down and then back up. But again, I have seen gravity fed systems too. So the main idea is you're going to probably have a pretty dense stocking rate of your fish. You're going to feed them an appropriate amount. And again, if you need help figuring these things out, please reach out to us, because we can calculate the exact amount of food that your fish are going to need based on their weight and size. So we calculate those numbers so you have an exact poundage or grams, depending on the size of the system, of food to feed them every day. With that, they are going to excrete organic matter, which is going to create your nitrogen cycle. And that is what feeds your plant roots. Now, very specific, your plant roots. Again, you do not want your fish water touching any of the edible parts of the plants. Generally, to hold your plant roots, you're going to have either something like Dr. Lester was talking about earlier with the Rockwool, or possibly Hydrotone, which is the clay pellets he was speaking of earlier. Or it could be another soilless media. So you do have to have something that is going to support them. Sometimes that is just a simple styrofoam sheet with holes cut in it for the size of the net pots. So the roots will go through those net pots, and you'll actually be able to see them growing straight into the water. That's appropriate too. So anything that will support the plants is fine with us, as long as it's a food grade material. And again, it can provide them enough structure. You don't want them falling over into your water sources. And again, you don't want any kind of a spray where the spray is getting up onto your plant material. So this is just a second look to show you very quickly. There's one difference here, which is why I always leave this slide in. When you're looking at aquaponic system design, depending on the size of your system, you may want to add a filtration system in. If you're looking at doing something commercially, or where you're going to need any kind of food safety certifications, you're going to have that filter. So again, you can see here, you've got your fish tank, you've got your grow tray, you've got a pump to help the water recirculate, but you have that addition of the filter. We'll talk about filter pumps in just a little bit, but the reason for that is to keep those solid organic matters away from your plant roots. So you still get the benefit of the organic matter as it breaks down in the water column, but you don't have the solid, you know, your whole feces and things like that in the system. So, and that's a USDA requirement. So if you're using something that is like a homeowner system like these, that's not necessarily required by any means. But if you're doing something more commercially where you're thinking about selling produce, that filter is essential. So these are a couple examples of small homeowner systems. The bottom right corner is actually a commercial system, which I have seen out in some of our northern counties here. They took some old chicken barns and made them into aquaponic systems, and they've been very successful. One of them is Traders Hill Farms. You may see them out and about sometimes. But these other systems are systems that you could have in your backyard, on your porch, even on your desk at work. So if you see the little system in the middle there with the betta fish and the herbs, I will tell you realistically, as much as I love this picture, you're probably not going to have herbs that look that healthy from one little tiny betta fish. It's just not going to produce that much ammonia or nitrate. So just be aware, usually your stocking density has to be more than one fish, but these are still beautiful systems. So, and those are available. You can find them anywhere. You can find them on Amazon, Walmart.com. So that's pretty cool. The other thing I want to mention here that I don't go into in detail today, but if you're looking at some type of a desktop system or indoor system, remember your light sources. Your office light or home light may not be quite enough. So if you don't have a good window to let sunlight in, you may have to add some artificial light sources. So they have some that come with those now as far as like those commercially made systems, but you can also build your own. So there's a few systems here that I want to talk about. The one on the bottom left corner is called a Baroponic system. There's many different designs you can find online for this. This is just one idea, but oftentimes you can buy these barrels at your local feed store for anywhere from 10 to 25 bucks. You cut it in half and you can design it in a multitude of different ways. You can see in the middle there, they slice them in half long ways. I will tell you, I've done that, and it is kind of hard to stabilize that barrel. So I prefer to cut them in half vertically where you have that flat base. One of the very favorites for aquaponic systems in the middle bottom there, it's the IBC totes. These are a little more expensive, but these have been used for years to make aquaponic systems. And again, very similar to the barrel system, you just cut the top of it off, you flip that upside down for your plants, you can bolt it together to the bottom part, and then you just have your fish underneath it. So very, very easy ideas. And then lastly, in the top right-hand corner, this is a system that I actually built for classroom purposes to teach elementary school kids, so upper elementary schools, and you just have an aquarium full of goldfish on the bottom, and you have 2 Rubbermaid totes on top with your plants. And very effective, not expensive, not difficult. So just a few ideas, and like I said, there's far more out there. If you are looking for a commercial type design, there are several companies here in Florida that actually sell fully made, ready-made systems, or just the blueprints. So aquaponics has become very popular over the last decade. So this is actually the system at Epcot. If you've ever been to Epcot and you've been on the, what is the name of that ride, Bill? Do you remember the the land? Sorry.
Yeah, that's it, the land. Yeah.
I was having a moment there. So these are Nft Systems. So their nutrient film technique is what Nft stands for, and they are long PVC pipes, and the plant roots grow down in that, and you can see they're very specific rows, and when you harvest them, you just pick up 1 row at a time out of the system. And then of course, these are some younger tilapia in the system that they have some much larger systems there. If you're ever down towards Disney and you run through Epcot, I highly recommend taking their tour through the land. It's pretty interesting. Of course, they've got the state-of-the-art technology up and running. So, but aquaponic systems are a lot of fun. So before I jump into a few things on fish health to make sure that you're kind of prepared for that before you jump into it, I just want to make sure that you guys know there are a significant number of commercial aquaponic farms here in Florida. So I always like to share the love with them and let you know that if you're interested in checking some of these out, most of them have websites, but some of them also offer tours. So if you were ever interested in getting bigger with this, I would highly recommend talking to some of them before you jump into a commercial type system. So, and additionally, you may see some of their names on some of the produce that you buy from the shells in Publix and stuff with hydroponic vegetables. So, or you might see them out at a farmer's market or something. So most of these guys are very successful in what they do. All right, so let's talk a little bit about fish health and what we need to be considering before we jump into building an aquaponic system. So dissolved oxygen is going to be one of the most important water quality parameters. So as Bill mentioned earlier, if you're doing hydroponics, you really don't need an air pump. You don't have to have much of anything to get started with hydroponics. When you add fish, that changes a bit. So first of all, you're probably, unless you do a gravity fed system, you will need a pump to move the water to make it recirculating, but you'll also need an air pump to make sure that DO stays at a prime. So the Increased DO will also help your plant roots. That will help them process the nitrogen faster and complete their cycles, but it is essential for fish health. If your DO drops below about 4 milligrams per liter, your fish will start to get sick and die. Temperature, we already talked a little bit about temperature control with the tilapia. Some species are going to be more cold tolerant, but it's definitely something that you want to keep an eye on. So even if you don't have a heater system, you're going to want to think about the environmental conditions surrounding your tanks. You're also going to want to think about rainfall. You're going to want to think about sun and shade. Just like planting a garden, your fish are going to require knowing what those microclimates might be. So definitely something to take into consideration. Carbon dioxide is important, but it's not one of the most important ones, so we'll kind of skip over that. pH, we'll talk more about that in just a minute, but pH of fish, or water quality pH, for fish and for plants are very different. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And then lastly, we'll talk about total alkalinity and hardness as far as our primary water quality components. And what that is, alkalinity and hardness help with your biofiltration processes. So how do those bacteria get broke down, how quickly they get broke down, all of that. And so alkalinity and hardness can play a very quick role, but they're also something that we can modify. So, you know, it's just something that you have to take the time. Don't forget to test your water quality, and please test your water quality before you add your fish. So, and then you're going to have to keep monitoring it. So I say this because, one, we do have several counties in the state of Florida that offer water quality testing through UF-IFAS extension. There's also certain commercial companies that can offer water quality testing. This is very different than water quality testing for like your pumps or your homeowner residential use. So these are very specific tests. But you can also learn to do it yourself if it's something that you're going to be doing for a long term. And you can even buy the test kit, either a full commercial grade test kit. Those usually come from Hach, spelled H-A-C-H, or you can buy the test strips on Amazon. So if it's something you're just wanting to try, you're like, hey, I know I've got to test my ammonia and my nitrate levels. You can buy those test strips for about $10 on Amazon to get you started. So granted, I don't recommend that like from the beginning. You really should know what your full parameters are. So, but feel free to reach out to me if you need help with that. Again, so just a few more considerations. Again, your nitrogen cycle, which is going to be your ammonia, your nitrite, and nitrate, are going to be where your plant growth comes from. So fish would prefer those numbers to be 0, but if they're at 0, your plants aren't going to be very happy. Can't use chlorine, so no city water in the system, or if you are going to use city water, you're going to have to give it time and aeration to let that chlorine filter out of it. And then lastly, salinity is not beneficial for freshwater fish if it's in high quantities. So, all right, that's the basics. That's the real quick and dirty version. So I mentioned that pH is one of our difficult parameters to maintain for aquaponics, and there's a very distinct reason for this. So freshwater fish prefer higher pH levels of 6.5 to 9.0, and really 6.5 is on the lower side. Saltwater fish are going to prefer even higher levels of 7.8 to 8.3, where our plants prefer those lower pH levels, so 5.5 to 6.5. So to balance that, we really have to be ideally at a 6.5 to 7.0, preferably 7.0 for the fish at a minimum. So, you know, just realize going into this that your pH is a pretty fine line. Usually here in Florida, our well water, depending on where you're at, is going to be 7 to 8 roughly. And that's a pretty good spot for our fish, but your plants may not be very happy. So you may have to work on adjusting your pH. And there are several ways to do that. So adding different acids that are made for fish purposes. So again, these are just kind of the big thoughts that you want to consider. I also mentioned chlorine. So there are toxins in city water that include chlorine and chloramine. And chlorine is extremely toxic to fish, and it doesn't have to be in high quantities. So again, it's really important to make sure if you're using a city water source that you're putting it in a separate container first, and you're aerating it for multiple days and then checking your chlorine parameters prior to moving it in with your fish. So some signs of chlorine toxicity could include excessive mucus on the skin, what we call flashing. So you'll see the fish at the top of the water kind of spinning quickly, agitation, and of course, mortalities. So chloramine is slightly different, but in the same categorization, and dechlorination can result in significant levels of ammonia being released, which if that transitions into nitrate, the plants will be happy, but if it stays as ammonia, your fish are probably not going to do so well. So again, preferably using well water, not city water. So we were talking about ammonia. This is your ammonia is coming directly from your fish excretions. That's what your nitrogen process starts out as. From there, the bacteria break it down into nitrate, and then what your plants want is, they break it down in nitrite, and then what your plants want is this nitrate. So it does take a really strong bacterial foundation to get to that point. And we say this because with your aquaponic systems, you never want to start your fish and your plants at the same time. So there are some good aquaponic books out there. Usually they recommend starting plants first, but those are people that have a basis in horticulture, not fish science. Those of us that have a background in fish science recommend starting with the fish first, getting your fish stable, building that nitrogen cycle up, and getting your bacterial processes started, and then adding your plants. So there's not a right or wrong way to do it. There's just different considerations for both. If you start your plants first, you may be going to have to add in some artificial nitrogen sources, and then you've got to be careful adding your fish. So again, just food for thought. Alrighty. So again, the nitrate is the end process of the nitrogen cycle, and this is what your plants have been waiting for. This is what keeps them nice and healthy and green, and will also get you to your fruit production. So one thing to mention here is when we're looking at plants in regular soil environment, we want to be careful with not adding too much nitrogen, because then we get lush green growth and not a lot of fruit production. So we have to make sure there are times when you may want to add some other micronutrients to this. But if you're using a balanced fish food, you're probably going to have a lot of those other nutrients already included. So that's something that we don't have a lot of research on. So, but remember, nitrogen's not the only thing that your plants will need. Earlier on, I mentioned the fact that if you were going to be considering any type of a commercial type of aquaponic system or selling any type of food from your aquaponic system, you would need a biofilter. So biofiltration is really important for any type of fish system. This is what takes in the actual biosolids and processes them down by bacterial processes and helps them produce the end nitrogen cycle, which is nitrate. So there's 4 basic requirements for these systems. You can build your own system. I've seen some great homeowner systems that have used different techniques to build their own, or you can buy commercial systems. So the main thing you're going to need is a little bit of surface area. So that's going to be, at the top. You're going to need oxygen, you're going to need alkalinity, and of course your nitrogen source. Usually the nitrogen source is easy to come by. There's a variety of different things that you can use for this online. They make sponges, they make little balls that are called biofilters, all kinds of things. Sometimes, depending on the system, they even can be put in bags in the actual tank. Sometimes they are a separate filtration system. So definitely something you can do some homework on, but biofiltration is important. So a little more on fish health. If you haven't had experience raising fish before, first thing you need to know when you get your fish in is, first of all, buy from a quality source. You're going to want to quarantine fish before you enter them into any kind of a food system or with other fish to make sure they're not sick from transport or stress or anything else. So you're going to need to know what normal fish behavior looks like. The best way to do this is just physical observation and time. So you're going to look at their body position, and that means their body position in the water as well as their physical components. So you may see certain fish that have twists or turns in their spine or other deformities. That is a sign of a fish that probably needs to be culled. You're going to look at their color, and that generally means their skin color, their scale color. So usually a healthy fish is going to have really bright, almost iridescent type of colors. You're going to look at their feeding rate. So if they're feeding good, they're generally pretty healthy. If they're sick, they often won't eat. Respiratory rates, you shouldn't see them up at the top of the tank gasping for air. And of course, if you see a fish that's off by its side, by itself, that's probably not a good indicator too. Or if you see a fish that's being picked on. So these are just a few visual cues that you can kind of get yourself used to when you're thinking about adding fish. Infectious disease does happen in fish. So again, quarantine practices are really important because there are plenty of commercial grade operations when you buy your fish. However, when you get them in, you want to make sure they're not sick. So these are just a few examples. So remember that our primary pathogens include parasitic, bacterial, fungal, and viral processes. That is the same for both plants and fish, but they are usually different pathogens. So, but again, these processes are why you don't want your fish water and your plants, your edible part of your plants to mix. So this is the start of kind of where we have to think about food safety. So just a few factors that, may affect your fish health include poor water quality, which we're kind of pushing the limits on already because we want those higher nitrogen levels for our plants. Crowding, rough handling. So we really want to handle our fish as little as possible. Transportation. So obviously if you're just getting fish in. Inadequate nutrition. So vitamin C is really important to our fish, and using appropriate feed sources. So again, we just like our plants need micronutrients, our fish do too. Whatever we feed them is all they have. So using a good quality feed. Residual chlorine we already talked about, and then pre-existing disease. So either parasite loads or viral infections. And how do we tell all of this? First of all, know what normal looks like so you can recognize abnormal. Take some time and just do some general observations of your fish. Check them twice a day. Just like any other farm animal that you would have, you want to put eyes on them. And then realize that when problems do occur, it's not usually a one-stop source. So it's usually a multifactorial issue, and we've got to look at the big picture to see where things went wrong. So that brings us into just general food safety risks with aquaponics. First of all, make sure that we're hand washing. You'll see if you ever go tour any of these commercial facilities, they have an entry room that includes hand washing, foot baths, things like that. I'm not suggesting that you need all of that, but hand washing 101 is really important. We want to stop the spread of microorganisms and contamination factors. Remember that live animals do carry pathogens. It's just part of the process. And then lastly, we're going to make sure that we reduce reduce cross-contamination by sanitizing our tools and sanitizing our hands. So if you look at the chart here from the CDC, you can see that fish and shellfish are one of our lowest risk factors for illness and death from food contamination. However, again, we still have to be careful because they can make you very sick if it's not handled appropriately. So a few types of contaminants that we should be concerned about with aquaponics. Obviously, chemical contaminants could be very harmful to our fish, but could also be transposed into our edibles. The physical contaminants, we don't want anybody dropping anything into our water sources. We don't want the actual physical biosolids to be up in our plant beds. And of course, the biological is our majority of concern with bacterial and fungi pathogens. And then not too worried about poisonous plants and animals for this particular purpose. So just a quick example of good handling practices for aquaponics. You can see the one on the left here is a good handling practice. You can see obviously he's washed his hands and he's cutting that lettuce above the root zone, so there's no cross-contamination between the water source, the roots, and the actual edible product. On the bottom, you see somebody reaching their hand down into the water source. That is not something you want to do when harvesting. So again, we want to keep that separate, the edible parts versus the water parts. So most common risk factors for foodborne illness from the CDC are poor personal hygiene, Improper handling, storage temperatures. You've got to know what the storage temperatures are depending on what you're harvesting. Inadequate cooking, contaminated equipment or cross-contamination, food from an unsafe source, so buying food from someone who has used bad handling practices, and then environmental contamination. So just a few thoughts to keep in mind. We reduce these risk factors by making sure we're using proper sanitation techniques, harvesting safely. We do offer some classes here at UF on food safety and especially on harvesting safely. So managing warm-blooded animal feces, obviously fish are not warm-blooded, but it still is a potential source of a biohazard. So we need to manage water sources. One thing that would be needed to be considered here is pest problems. So I won't go into insect pests on this, but one thing I do want to talk about is mammal pests. So birds, raccoons, other things may want to eat your fish, but they can also cross-contaminate your vegetables. So just something to be aware of. Raccoons love tilapia tanks. They're really a big fan. So they say, please put one in your backyard so we can come snack on it at night. So, and then disposing of your system wastewater, you can use this. Generally, there's not much wastewater in aquaponics, but you can use this in your regular gardens, but please don't put it on other edibles that might have root crops in it. All right, I think that is everything that I had for the very quick intro of aquaponics, and I hope you learned something. That was a lot to cover, but it's a very, very interesting field of business to be in. And again, there are no endless options to what you can do with it. It's just a matter of how much time and energy you have to put into it. Oh, Bill, you're muted. You're muted. Dr. Lester, if you can hear me, you are muted.
Sorry, probably helps if I turn my microphone on. So,
we can see you were chatting away. You were having a wonderful conversation.
Oh, I'm sure I was. We did get a question here, and for anybody watching us live, if you have a question, just go ahead and type it in the chat box, and we'll be able to see it and show it and go ahead and answer it. But Dopal, I think I'm saying that correctly, had a question about getting more information on chemical for water in the tubs and how to check pH, and then followed up with not with aquaponics, but the tubs at the beginning where you can buy spun rock or the Rockwool and solution for the water.
Great.
So let's take that one step at a time. For testing pH in water, if you're doing aquaponics, what's the best way to do that?
So to start with, I would suggest, depending on where you're at, finding out if your local extension office runs water quality tests. If they do, bring them a sample. And what you're going to want to do is, if you already have a tank set up, you're going to want to take a jar or a bottle and fill it up below the surface of the water, let all the air come out and seal it under the water. If you're just thinking about getting started, then we could just run a regular tap water sample just to see where you're at with your parameters. Or if you just want to know pH, jump on Amazon and they have the pH sticks, and they take less than a minute to test. They're like $10, and you just dip it in your water sample and it gives you a reading. You just match the colors up on it.
Yeah, we use them in our swimming pool and they work. They're not incredibly accurate. I mean, if you want to get deeper into this, there are testing probes and things that you can get that give you a very, very accurate pH reading for water. But of course, the more accurate it is, the more expensive it is also.
Correct. And if you're thinking about getting into this seriously, it's a couple $100, but Hawk, who also sells a lot of the test strips, offers the fish farming kit, and it's about, the full one is about $450, but they have a couple smaller versions, and those come with enough to do quite a few samples, and those are well-known kits. So they're used at multiple universities.
Okay, and another part of this question was where to get the spun rock, the Rockwool Cubes. And I just looked really quickly on Amazon, and there they are. This is what Rockwool Cubes look like when you purchase them. They come in sheets, and they're already pre-cut for you, and you just have to finish cutting them up into individual cubes. They have different sizes. Obviously, there's a wide variety of different hydroponic nutrients that you could purchase from a lot of different companies. We don't recommend necessarily one over another. You see that they also have large Rockwool cubes that you can use. So a lot of these materials are available online for you to purchase to get started with.
Absolutely. And depending on where you're located at, you might just Google hydroponic companies around you, because I know up here, I'm not in Gainesville, but I go to Gainesville frequently. There's a big hydroponics store there called Gator Hydroponics, and I know it's not the only one in Central Florida. And sometimes if you're just out and about and you're just looking for something to do, it's really fun to go in there and look at all the stuff they have. So they have some, pre-built systems. They have pH adjustments. They have the different Rockwool. They've got Hydrotone. They pretty much carry everything in stock. And so, those kind of companies can be really fun for an afternoon of play day.
Yeah, I've done that before, and it's a good way to meet other people and maybe speak with the shop owners if you have questions. You're just trying to
Absolutely.
get started. Something else that you could use as reference, University of Florida has a Small Farms Institute, and let me go ahead and share their website really quick. They have a Small Farms Institute, and they have a lot of information on hydroponics. And you can see from some of the pictures here, they have classes, they have information, they have fact sheets on growing hydroponic crops, greenhouse design, high tunnel, low tunnel, aquaponics, tutorial videos. So this is another really, really good resource. If I haven't already, I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat so that all of you have it. And Wendy, let's bring you back in here. How are we doing time-wise?
I think we have about 9 minutes left. So we've got
okay. That's enough time for me to talk about pests really quickly here and hit just kind of the high points, I guess. So if you begin growing vegetables and plants hydroponically, and if you take your little kit here, your little setup, and you place that on, you could put that on your screen back porch. You could put it around your pool lanai. You could put it outside on a table. You could put it, if you're fortunate enough to have a small greenhouse, you could put it there. It's going to work great, but you're going to have some little pest problems because there's a lot of insects outside. So even if you put them in some kind of enclosed, protected area, obviously you're going to be able to keep out the raccoons and the deer and larger things. But many insect pests are very, very small, and they have ways of getting inside. Think if any of you have any houseplants. Houseplants occasionally get insect pests, and you're thinking, well, how the heck do they get inside of my house? Well, I hate to tell you this, but you do have bugs inside your house. For many of these insect pests, all you have to do is just open the front door and walk in or walk out. They're very, very tiny. They float on the breeze, so they're just going to kind of float inside. They're going to land on your houseplants. They're going to land on your hydroponic lettuce, and you may start to have a problem with them. So some of the most common ones are going to be things like aphids. Spider mites are a very common indoor problem. Anybody who has houseplants knows that spider mites are a regular problem. Mealybugs the same way. I don't know how they find their way inside, but they do. And then another problem that some people can have from hydroponics, or also for other reasons, maybe you left a banana sitting on the counter for too long and it started to go bad. You're going to start to get really, really small flies on it. And there's a number of different flies you can get, but kind of preventing them and getting rid of them goes hand in hand. So here's a picture of what spider mites look like on the tip of a houseplant. They make a little kind of spider web structure. That's how they get their common name, spider mites. And those tiny little dots you see in the webbing there are actually the spider mites. And they are a real problem. If you get some spider mites, their populations go through the roof very, very quickly. They do a fantastic job of reproduction, and you're going to go from a couple spider mites to a lot of them, and they can do a lot of damage to your plants. They do feed on lettuce. They feed on a wide variety of different plants, anything from lettuce to tomatoes to houseplants. I can't think of too many houseplants that are going to be immune to spider mites. So if you do develop insect pest problems, you want to follow something called IPM, or Integrated Pest Management Basics. And the most important starting point and first step is to identify exactly what your problem is. Don't go grabbing sprays, or I know if you're on Facebook a lot in gardening groups, neem oil is everybody's favorite thing to use. Don't spray first and ask questions later. Very important you identify exactly what your problem is first, and then find the appropriate treatment if you need to. The best and smartest thing to do with any vegetables you're growing, whether they're in aquaponics, hydroponics in your backyard, is frequent scouting. Go and check them on a very, very frequent, ideally daily basis, and just take a close look at them. See, do I see any insects on them? Is there anything flying around them? Do I have dead leaves, spots on leaves? Am I starting to have an issue? If so, I need to look a little bit deeper and identify what my problem is. And then I could check with my local extension office or any one of us to figure out what the problem is and get advice on how to deal with it.
Bill, I want to mention too, if you don't mind, on aquaponics, if anybody thinks about doing aquaponics out there, definitely don't spray first and then wonder what's going to happen later, because your fish are usually not immune to these sprays, not even neem oil. So you've got to be careful, and using some of the sticky traps for observation to make sure your pest problems don't get out of control is a really good way to monitor those pest problems.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, with a lot of different, especially insecticides, if you read the label and follow the directions and use the right protective equipment, it can be very safe for you to mix and spray and use and apply. It could be very safe for your plants also. But if you read the fine print on the label, you'll find that there's a lot of warnings that these substances can be very, very dangerous to aquatic organisms and amphibians also. So a lot of these things can be very, very dangerous, even if you spray improperly and it gets into a retention pond or a water body near your house. So you want to be very careful, read that entire label to make sure that you're safe, the kids are safe, the neighbors are safe, and everything living in your neighborhood is safe, and the fish, your tilapia, are safe also.
Yep.
So.
And same with fungal issues too. Copper is extremely toxic to fish. So if you have fungal issues, you're better off to remove the plant and not spray any chemicals.
Yeah, I know both Maxine and I could tell you stories from people who spray first and then ask questions later. You don't want to be one of those people. It usually doesn't work out very well. But there are, for whatever your problem is, some kind of safe and effective control or steps that you can take to help deal with the issue. So aphids are a very, very common insect pest, both indoors and out. They come in different colors. They can be orange or tan or green or brown. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts. So what they do is they poke into your plants and the leaves and they suck the juices out. Aphids, you can kind of tell it's an aphid because they always have these structures on their back end that's called a siphuncuли. But technically they look kind of like tailpipes. So this is a pretty easy to identify insect if you're using a hand lens or magnifying glass and you get a good up close view of them. They're pretty easy to identify. So there's a few pictures and you can see the large one on the left. If you look near his rear end, he's got those two little tailpipes on the back. So that will tell you that it's an aphid. Spider mites, like I said, are a very, very common pest. They're not insects technically because they have 8 legs and not 6. They're mites. They also have piercing, sucking mouth parts, so they poke into the leaves. and they cause a problem called stippling. It looks like you poke the leaf 100 times with a pin dipped in white paint, basically. So it's kind of distinctive. If we see a picture of it, we know it, pretty quickly. And they create that webbing to be able to move around your plants and also for protection. It helps to protect them from beneficial insects that are trying to eat them. So there's some close-up pictures of spider mites. If you look at them under a microscope, they just kind of crawl around and wiggle their legs at you. And like I said, their numbers go up very, very quickly. Mealybugs are another very common insect pest. They look like tiny little cotton balls on your plant stems. And sometimes you really can't see the actual mealybug. You just see the cottony mass that they leave behind. And this is a very common houseplant problem also. So there's a few more pictures of what they look like. And then getting into the tiny little flying insects. Really hard to tell what they are when they're flying around your head or flying around your kitchen counter, your hydroponics, because they're very, very tiny. They could be fungus gnats, they could be fruit flies, they could be phorid flies or shore flies, but they have a couple things in common. I know if I look at one under a microscope, the one on the right, a phorid fly, is very distinctive. Its back leg, its femur, the part that's connected to its body, is really, really wide and fat. And they are really annoying if you get them in your house. What they like is they like water. They like dirty, muddy spots. They like rotting vegetation. That's why I said some people, if you have if your the sink pipes get dirty, you can have phorid fly problems. If you leave vegetables on the counter and they go bad, you can have problems also. So the best defense against all these little flying insects is sanitation. And like Maxine said with food safety, and I'm sure Wendy would add with food safety also, sanitation's important for plant safety and reducing the number of little pest problems you might have. So keep things cleaned, keep things wiped up, get rid of the spills, the puddles, the dead leaves, the rotted plants. Keep things really clean, and you're going to have far fewer problems with little insects, especially the little flying ones that can be so annoying. So I see that once again, we showed pretty good time management today because it's just about that time. So let me go ahead and throw in, coming up next Friday, we're going to be back here again at 10 a.m. back here on YouTube Live, and we're going to be talking about water. And we're going to have our Sea Grant agent, Brittany Hall-Scharf, talking about seafood and shellfish, because she's the expert on that. Don't ask me, I'm not an expert. I love seafood, but I don't know much about it. I can't identify it. And we're also going to have Dr. Yi Lin on here, who is our Central District water specialist. So we're going to be talking about water, the importance of clean water, importance of sanitary water, and Brittany's going to be sharing a lot of information with us about seafood and about how it all ties in with food systems and how you can help provide for your family and provide more for yourself through food systems and from participating in these sessions and learning more. So let me look really quick, and I don't see any other questions. Guys, I think that's about all I have.
Awesome.
You want to drop a link in the chat for the Qualtrics? That would be awesome.
Okay, I think I put the Qualtrics one in there earlier, but let me go ahead and share.
I see it now.
The link to our Qualtrics survey.
And thank you guys for those of you who already filled it out last week. So this one's short and sweet also, but we appreciate you taking those few minutes to do that for us. And with that, I think.
And let me put the link to the University of Florida Small Farms website. That is a great source for more information also.
Yep.
And like I said, when I get a chance, I'll go back and put all these links in the description for this video so that you'll have them handy and you can go there and get a lot more information. And let me very quickly, if you have any other questions or you want to get in contact with any of us, there is my email. And there is Wendy's email. And Maxine, I think that's your correct email?
That is correct.
Okay, I'm 3 for 3 today. It's off to a good start today, I guess.
Yes, it is. Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll see all of you back here again next week.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.